Most people believe the forests of Michigan are quiet places. They imagine peaceful lakes reflecting the sky, endless pine trees swaying gently in the wind, and narrow trails where the only sounds are birds and distant rivers. To visitors, these woods feel calm, almost welcoming, a place where nature surrounds you and the world seems far away. But people who truly live near these forests know something different, because sometimes the woods don't feel empty. Sometimes the silence becomes too deep. The animals stop making noise. The wind dies suddenly between the trees. And in those moments, a strange feeling creeps into the air, an instinctive warning that something else is moving nearby, something watching for decades. People across northern Michigan have whispered about a creature that walks through these forests at night. Hunters have reported hearing massive footsteps pacing them through the trees. Campers have woken to find enormous tracks circling their tents by morning. Drivers on lonely back roads have claimed to see towering canine shapes crossing the road ahead of their headlights. A creature many call the Dogman. Witnesses describe something that shouldn't exist, a massive wolf-like being capable of standing upright like a human. A predator with long arms, powerful legs, and eyes that reflect amber in the darkness. Some say it runs on 4 legs like a wolf. Others insist it walks calmly through the forest on 2, but almost every witness agrees on one detail: the intelligence in its eyes. Many who claim to have encountered the Dogman say it doesn't behave like a normal animal. It watches, observes, studies people from the shadows before disappearing silently back into the woods. For years, most of these stories have been dismissed as local folklore, just another legend told around campfires. But lately something strange has been happening in Michigan. More sightings, more reports, more people describing the same towering figure moving through remote forests and back roads. And the deeper you look into these encounters, the harder it becomes to dismiss them as imagination, because the descriptions are always the same eyes, the same towering shape, the same terrifying silence that follows. What you are about to hear is one of those encounters. A story that began with a simple drive down a quiet logging road and quickly turned into something far more disturbing. A moment that forced one man to question everything he thought he knew about the forests surrounding his home, because sometimes the scariest legends are not the ones that are invented. They are the ones that people are too afraid to talk about. And if the sightings spreading across Michigan are real, then the question isn't whether the Dogman exists. The real question is this: how many times has it already been watching us from the forest without anyone noticing? And I've lived in the northern woods of Michigan my entire life. The forests here are old, quiet, and deeper than most people realize. When the wind moves through the pines at night, it sounds almost like voices whispering from another time. Most people who visit think these woods are peaceful. They see lakes, trails, and cabins glowing with warm lights. But those of us who grew up here know there are places where the forest feels wrong. Places where the animals go silent for no reason. Places where you feel watched. I used to laugh at the old stories told by hunters around campfires. Tales about something walking upright through the trees at night. Something that howled like a wolf but moved like a man. We all assumed it was just folklore, another one of those exaggerated northern legends. People here have always loved their mysterious stories, especially the one they call the Dogman. I never thought I would ever speak that word seriously. Not until the night everything changed. The Dogman legend has haunted northern Michigan for decades. People describe it as tall, powerful, covered in dark fur, with the head of a wolf and eyes that reflect like burning coals in the dark. Some say it runs on 4 legs like a wolf. Others swear they saw it standing upright like a man. The stories vary, but the fear in the witnesses' voices is always the same. Something ancient, something intelligent, something that shouldn't exist. The first strange sign appeared during a late autumn evening. I was driving down a narrow logging road near the forests outside Grayling. The sun had just disappeared beyond the tree line, leaving the sky painted in deep purple and cold blue shadows. The forest felt unusually quiet that night. No owls calling, no coyotes howling in the distance, just silence stretching endlessly through the trees. A silence so thick it almost felt alive. About 5 miles down the road, I noticed something unusual near the ditch. At first I thought it was a fallen branch or maybe the shadow of a stump. But as my headlights moved closer, the shape shifted slightly. It was large, much larger than any dog or wolf I had ever seen in Michigan. The figure moved slowly, deliberately, as if it knew I was watching. My hands tightened around the steering wheel. Then it stood up. I swear to God, it stood up like a man. Its silhouette rose slowly above the roadside brush, towering far taller than any wolf could ever reach. The headlights caught the outline of long arms hanging beside its body. Its shoulders were massive, almost unnatural in shape. For a brief moment it looked directly toward my truck. And that's when I saw the eyes. 2 bright reflections stared back from the darkness. They weren't the yellow glow of deer or the green reflection of a raccoon. These were deeper, darker, almost amber in color. And they didn't move away like animals normally do. It watched me, calmly, intentionally, as if it was trying to understand me. My heartbeat started pounding so loudly I could hear it echoing in my ears. The creature stepped forward once, its movements slow and controlled. The body shifted in a way that felt disturbingly human. Its legs bent differently than a wolf's. Its arms swung slightly as it moved. I realized in that moment that whatever I was looking at wasn't just an animal. There was awareness behind those eyes, something calculating, something patient. My instincts screamed at me to leave. I slammed my foot on the accelerator, and the truck lurched forward down the road. In the rearview mirror, the shape remained standing near the ditch for a few seconds longer. Then it disappeared back into the black forest behind it. But just before the trees swallowed it completely, I heard something. A howl, not a normal wolf howl. This sound was deeper, almost vibrating through the air. It echoed across the forest like a warning carried through the hills. The sound made the hair on the back of my neck rise instantly. Even inside the truck, with the engine roaring, the howl felt impossibly close. That night I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying the moment over and over in my mind. The way it stood upright, the eyes reflecting in the headlights, the deliberate way it watched me before stepping forward. Every detail felt too clear to dismiss as imagination. I had spent my entire life in these woods. I knew wolves. I knew bears. But that thing was neither. The next morning I drove back to the same road. Part of me hoped I would find nothing. Just tire tracks and quiet trees, proving it had all been my imagination. But when I reached the exact spot where the figure had stood, something in the dirt stopped me cold. Deep impressions pressed into the muddy roadside, footprints larger than any wolf track I had ever seen, and beside them, footprints that looked disturbingly human. And that was the moment I realized something terrifying. The legends people whisper about the Dogman in Michigan might not be stories at all. Something is moving through these forests at night. Something powerful. Something intelligent. And if my experience was real, then the question isn't whether the Dogman exists. The real question is how many people have already seen it and stayed silent. The deeper I looked at those tracks, the more my stomach tightened. They weren't random impressions in the dirt. Each mark had weight behind it, as if something incredibly heavy had stepped there with full control. The mud still looked fresh, darker than the surrounding soil. That meant whatever left those prints had been there recently, very recently. I crouched down beside them, trying to measure the size with my hand. My palm barely covered half of one footprint. The shape was wrong for a human. The heel was elongated, the toes slightly spread, almost claw-like, but still disturbingly human in structure. It looked like a hybrid between a wolf track and a barefoot human footprint. I had hunted these forests for over 20 years, and I had never seen anything remotely like it. Even bears didn't leave prints shaped like that. Bears had wide pads and visible claws. This thing looked different, and there was something else next to the footprints. I noticed deep punctures in the dirt, as if claws had dug into the ground when the creature shifted its weight. Whatever made those marks had incredible strength. The soil had hardened after the cold night air, yet the impressions were still deep and clear. I slowly stood up and scanned the tree line around me. The forest felt unusually dense that morning. It felt like something was watching again. A cold breeze moved through the pine branches overhead, making the needles whisper softly together. Normally, that sound is calming in the woods, but that morning it felt like a warning. I suddenly realized how isolated that road really was. The nearest house was at least 15 miles away. My truck sat alone on the narrow gravel path, surrounded by miles of silent forest. Then I heard something. A branch snapped somewhere deeper in the trees. The sound was sharp, unmistakable. Not the soft rustle of a squirrel or the distant step of a deer. This was heavier, something with weight behind it. My body froze instantly as my eyes searched the shadows between the trunks. Nothing moved. The forest stood still again, like a frozen photograph. But my instincts were screaming now. I wasn't alone out there. I slowly stepped back toward my truck, trying not to make sudden movements. Every hunter learns to read the forest, to understand the language of silence and sound. And right then the woods were speaking clearly. Something had been moving nearby just seconds ago. Something large enough to break branches without trying. Then the smell hit me. A thick, musky odor drifted through the air. It reminded me of wet fur mixed with something metallic, almost like old blood. I had smelled wolves before, even bears at close distance. But this scent was stronger, sharper. It clung to the cold air in a way that made my chest tighten. My pulse began racing. I reached the truck door and grabbed the handle, just before climbing inside. I looked back toward the tree line one last time. At first, I saw nothing but darkness between the pines. But then something shifted behind a fallen log about 40 yards away. The movement was subtle, almost too slow to notice. Two shapes appeared above the log. Tall, pointed shapes, ears large. Triangular ears rising slowly from behind the fallen tree. My breathing stopped. A massive head lifted slightly above the log, just enough for the eyes to appear. Those same amber reflections stared directly at me again. They weren't glowing brightly this time, just reflecting the pale morning light. But the intelligence behind them was unmistakable. The creature wasn't startled. It wasn't confused. It was observing me, studying me. The head sank slowly back behind the log, disappearing into the forest like a shadow melting into darkness. No sound followed, no footsteps, no rustling branches, just silence again, as if nothing had ever been there. I climbed into the truck and locked the doors immediately as I started the engine. One thought kept repeating in my mind over and over. Whatever that thing was, it had been there the entire time, watching me examine the tracks it had left behind, waiting quietly just inside the forest. And if it wanted to approach, there would have been nothing I could have done to stop it. I didn't drive home immediately. Instead, I sat inside the truck with the engine running, staring at the tree line where those eyes had appeared. My hands were still gripping the steering wheel, and I could feel a faint tremor in my fingers. I had faced wild animals before: wolves, bears, even a moose once, but this felt completely different. Those animals react to humans with fear or aggression. What I had just seen showed something else entirely: patience, awareness, curiosity. After a few minutes, I finally forced myself to breathe normally again. Part of me wanted to leave and never come back to that road. But another part of me, the stubborn part that had grown up exploring these woods, needed answers. I grabbed my phone and stepped back out of the truck. The cold morning air felt sharper now, almost electric against my skin. I slowly walked toward the tracks again, this time taking several photos from different angles. If I was going to tell anyone about this, I needed proof. The footprints looked even stranger through the camera lens. Each impression showed clear pressure patterns, deeper toward the front, like something had leaned forward as it walked. The spacing between the prints was enormous. Whatever made them had a stride far longer than a normal human. I followed the line of tracks toward the trees, my heart pounding harder with every step. The prints stopped abruptly at the edge of the forest. Beyond that point, the ground was covered in fallen pine needles, making it impossible to see where they continued. But something else caught my attention there. The bark on one of the nearby trees had been scraped deeply, long vertical gouges running nearly 6 feet above the ground. The wood beneath the bark was exposed in pale streaks, as if claws had raked across it with tremendous force. No wolf could reach that high. I stepped closer and ran my fingers near one of the marks. The grooves were wide, spaced far apart, deeper than anything I had ever seen made by an animal. A chill ran down my spine as I looked up at the height of the scratches. Whatever left them would have had to stand upright to reach that level, and suddenly the forest felt heavier again. The wind had stopped completely now. The trees stood perfectly still, their branches frozen in the grey morning light. Even the birds were silent. I glanced back toward the road, suddenly aware of how far I had wandered from the truck. That uneasy feeling returned instantly, the same one I felt the night before, the sense of being watched. Then I heard footsteps, not fast, not crashing through the woods like a deer fleeing danger. These steps were slow, deliberate, somewhere deeper between the trees to my left. My body locked in place as the sound came again, one heavy step, pressing down into leaves and branches. Then another. Something large was moving parallel to me. I couldn't see it, but I could hear it pacing through the forest just beyond the dense undergrowth. Each step was measured, controlled, almost cautious. It wasn't running. It wasn't stalking in a rush. It was following me. I slowly backed away from the tree line, trying not to turn my back on the woods. The footsteps continued, matching my movement, step for step, somewhere behind the trees. I felt a cold pressure in my chest as adrenaline surged through my body. My instincts were clear now. Whatever this was, it didn't want to reveal itself yet. It was studying me again. When I finally reached the gravel road, the sound stopped instantly. The forest went silent once more, as if the presence had simply melted back into the shadows. I stood there for several seconds, listening, hoping to hear another step. Nothing. I climbed into the truck again and shut the door quickly. As I started driving away, I checked the side mirror one last time. The dark wall of forest stretched endlessly behind me, quiet and unmoving. But deep down, I knew something unsettling. That thing hadn't followed me by accident. It had been escorting me out of its territory. And if the legends about the Dogman in Michigan were true, then I had just walked into the territory of something far older and far more intelligent than anyone wants to believe. I drove nearly 10 miles before the tension in my chest finally began to ease. The gravel road curved along a frozen marsh, and the open landscape gave me a clear view in every direction. For the first time since that morning began, I didn't feel trapped between walls of trees. But the momentary relief didn't last long. My mind kept replaying the footsteps, pacing me through the forest. It hadn't sounded like an animal hunting. Predators move differently. Wolves stalk quickly and quietly, trying to close distance without being noticed. Bears crash through the woods with heavy, careless steps. But whatever had been moving beside me had done so calmly. It had matched my pace, matched my direction, almost as if it wanted me to know it was there. That thought stayed with me the entire drive home. When I finally pulled into my driveway, outside the small town of Grayling, Michigan, the sun had climbed higher in the sky, but the cold still clung to the air. My cabin sat near the edge of another dense forest line, something that had never bothered me before. Living close to the woods was normal here. Everyone did. But that morning, as I stepped out of the truck, I found myself scanning the trees automatically. Every shadow looked different now. I brought the photos of the footprints inside and loaded them onto my computer. The images appeared clearly on the screen, and the details were even more disturbing than I remembered. The length of the tracks, the unnatural shape of the toes, the enormous spacing between steps. I zoomed in on one image where the print was especially deep. Something about it made my stomach tighten. The front of the print showed pressure marks like claws digging into the soil during movement. But the heel section looked almost human. It was the kind of anatomical structure you'd expect from something that could walk upright for long distances. I stared at the photo for several minutes before leaning back in my chair. Then I remembered something. A few years earlier, during a local hunting season gathering, an older man had mentioned seeing something strange near the Osable River. Everyone at the table laughed when he described it. A tall wolf-shaped figure running upright through the trees before disappearing into the darkness. Back then, I assumed the man had simply been exaggerating after a few drinks. Now, I wasn't so sure. I grabbed my phone and searched through some local archives online. The deeper I looked, the stranger things became. Reports scattered across northern Michigan over the past several decades. Campers hearing massive footsteps around their tents at night. Hunters describing large canine shapes standing upright on distant ridges. Drivers claiming something ran across remote highways on two legs. The descriptions were eerily similar: tall, wolf-headed, muscular, intelligent, and almost every sighting occurred in isolated forests or near deep wilderness areas. The same types of places where human activity drops off quickly after sunset. The more reports I read, the more a disturbing pattern began to form in my mind. These weren't random sightings. Something had been moving through these forests for a long time, quietly, carefully, staying just beyond the edges of human understanding. And suddenly the memory of those amber eyes staring from behind the fallen log returned with terrifying clarity. Whatever that thing was, it wasn't lost. It knew exactly where it was. And if the stories spreading across northern Michigan were even partially true, then the Dogman wasn't just a legend whispered around campfires. It was a predator that had learned how to remain hidden. And the deeper I researched those reports that afternoon, the more one terrifying possibility began to emerge. The encounter I had experienced might not have been a rare event. It might have been happening far more often than anyone realized. And if that was true, then the Dogman in Michigan might not be hiding deep in the wilderness at all. It might already be living much closer to people than anyone wants to believe. Asterisk for the next 2 days. I couldn't think about anything else. Every spare moment I had was spent reading reports, forum discussions, and old local newspaper archives. The deeper I searched, the more disturbing the pattern became. Stories going back nearly a century described the same type of encounter: massive canine figures seen standing upright, usually near isolated forest roads or deep logging areas. But one detail kept appearing again and again. Witnesses often said the creature didn't immediately attack. Instead, it watched. Many of the people who reported seeing it described the same unsettling behavior I had experienced. The creature would remain partially hidden in the tree line, observing quietly before disappearing. Some hunters even claimed it followed them through the woods for long distances without revealing itself. That detail made my skin crawl, because that's exactly what had happened to me. One report from the 1970s caught my attention more than the others. A group of teenagers driving near the forests outside Traverse City, Michigan, claimed something enormous chased their car down a dirt road at night. They described seeing a wolf-like figure running on 2 legs behind their headlights, keeping pace with the vehicle for nearly half a mile before suddenly vanishing into the woods. The description sounded impossible, but after what I had seen, it didn't feel impossible anymore. Late that evening, I decided to step outside for some air. The sky above northern Michigan was clear, revealing a wide blanket of stars stretching across the cold darkness. Normally, that view always made me feel calm. The woods at night had always been familiar to me, something peaceful and predictable. But that night, the silence felt different. I stood near the edge of my property, looking out toward the tree line behind my cabin. The forest stretched endlessly into darkness, its tall pines swaying slightly in the night breeze. Somewhere far away, a lone coyote began howling. The sound echoed softly through the hills. Then something answered it. The reply was deeper, much deeper. At first I thought it was just another wolf joining the call, but the tone quickly shifted. The sound that followed was longer, louder, and carried an eerie vibration that didn't belong to any animal I recognized. It rolled across the forest like distant thunder, echoing through the trees before fading into silence again. Every hair on my arm stood up. The howl had come from somewhere, much closer than the coyote. I stared into the dark woods, trying to pinpoint the direction of the sound. My eyes searched the tree line, but the darkness swallowed every detail. The wind moved softly through the branches, creating shifting shadows across the ground, and then I heard movement. Something large stepped through the brush, somewhere beyond the trees. The sound was faint but unmistakable, branches bending, leaves crunching slowly under heavy weight. My body instantly tensed as the footsteps continued for several seconds before stopping completely. It was the same deliberate movement I had heard before, something powerful moving carefully through the forest. I held my breath, listening for another sound. The woods went completely silent again, as if everything inside them had suddenly frozen. Even the wind seemed to pause. Then two faint reflections appeared in the darkness. Far back between the trees, amber-colored eyes. They hovered in the shadows for only a few seconds, barely visible in the moonlight. But there was no mistaking them. The height alone told me everything I needed to know. Whatever stood there was towering above the surrounding brush, and it was watching my cabin, watching me. The eyes blinked once, then disappeared as the shape slowly moved deeper into the forest. The footsteps followed seconds later, fading gradually into the distance. I remained standing there long after the forest went quiet again, because at that moment I realized something far more unsettling than the encounter on the logging road. That thing hadn't just been passing through the woods near my home. It had followed me, and if the Dogman truly was moving through the forests of Michigan, then the terrifying truth might be this: it already knows exactly where I live. I barely slept that night. Every creak of the cabin walls, every shift of the wind against the roof made my eyes snap open. My mind kept replaying the moment those amber eyes appeared between the trees behind my property. The distance between my cabin and that tree line was less than 60 yards, close enough for something large to cover in seconds, and that thought refused to leave my head. Around 3 in the morning, the forest outside went completely silent again. That silence woke me instantly. Anyone who spends time in the woods knows that when every insect, every owl, every small animal suddenly stops making noise, something bigger has entered the area. I sat up in bed, listening carefully. For a moment there was nothing. Then came the footsteps, slow, heavy, deliberate. They weren't rushing through the forest. They were moving closer to the cabin. Each step pressed into the ground with a dull weight I could almost feel through the floorboards. My heart began pounding so hard it felt like it might echo through the room. Whatever was outside was massive. The steps stopped somewhere near the edge of the yard. I slid out of bed quietly and moved toward the window, careful not to make any sudden noise. The moonlight outside cast a pale glow over the clearing behind the cabin. The trees formed a dark wall just beyond the open space. For several seconds I saw nothing. Then something moved near the edge of the forest. Tall shadows shifted between 2 trees. My breath caught in my throat. At first it looked like a person standing there, but the proportions were wrong. The shoulders were far too wide. The arms hung unusually long beside its body, and when it stepped forward slightly into the moonlight, the outline became clearer. It was enormous. The figure stood easily 7 feet tall, maybe more. Its body was covered in thick dark fur that caught the moonlight in faint streaks. The head was unmistakably canine, long snout, pointed ears, powerful jawline. But the posture was human. It was standing upright. For a moment, neither of us moved. The Dogman simply stood there at the edge of the clearing, watching the cabin, watching me. Even from that distance, I could see the faint reflection of those amber eyes again. They glowed softly in the darkness, focused directly on the window, focused directly on me. The creature tilted its head slightly, almost like a wolf listening to a distant sound. Its chest rose and fell slowly as it breathed. I could see the muscles beneath the fur shifting with each subtle movement. Then it took one step forward. The massive foot pressed into the snow at the edge of the clearing. The movement was controlled, cautious, like a predator testing the distance to its prey. My entire body froze. The Dogman raised its head slightly, sniffing the air. Its nostrils flared as if it could smell everything inside the cabin. I suddenly realized how thin the walls around me really were. For several long seconds it remained there, studying the house. Then something strange happened. Creature slowly turned its head toward the deeper forest behind it. The ears twitched slightly, reacting to something I couldn't hear. The massive body tensed briefly, as if listening carefully to distant movement. And just like that, the moment broke, without another glance toward the cabin. The Dogman turned and stepped back into the darkness between the trees. Within seconds, the enormous shape disappeared completely into the forest. The footsteps faded into the distance, but I remained standing at the window, my hands shaking slightly, because one thing had become terrifyingly clear. That creature had not been hunting. It had been checking on me. The following morning, the forest looked deceptively normal again. Sunlight filtered softly through the tall pines behind my cabin, illuminating the thin layer of frost covering the ground. Birds had returned to their branches, chirping like nothing unusual had happened during the night. The peaceful scene almost made me question everything I had witnessed, or almost. But the moment I stepped outside, the truth was waiting for me. Fresh tracks. They began right at the edge of the clearing behind my cabin. The impressions were deeper than the ones I had seen near the logging road. The snow had preserved every detail perfectly. Powerful footprints pressing straight across the yard before turning back toward the forest, and they were enormous. Each track looked nearly twice the length of my own boot. I slowly followed the line of prints, my breath visible in the cold morning air. The creature had approached the cabin exactly where I had seen it the night before. It had stood there for several seconds, maybe longer, by the depth of the impressions in the snow. Then, it turned away, but something else caught my attention immediately. There were two sets of tracks. I crouched lower, studying the ground more carefully. The first trail was the same pattern I had already seen, those strange hybrid footprints, part canine, part human in shape. But several feet behind them was another set of impressions, similar but slightly smaller. A cold wave of realization moved through my chest. There wasn't just one. The second set of tracks had followed the first almost perfectly, stepping in and around the deeper prints like something moving cautiously behind a leader. Whatever had visited my cabin the night before hadn't been alone. I suddenly felt extremely exposed standing there. The forest behind my property seemed larger than ever now, stretching endlessly into shadow between the tall trunks. If two of those creatures were moving through these woods, then there was no way to know how many more might exist deeper within the forest. And something else about the tracks unsettled me even more. The larger prints had come all the way to the clearing, but the smaller ones had stopped at the tree line. Almost like the second creature had remained hidden while the first one approached the Cabin, watching, observing, waiting. I slowly backed away from the tracks and returned toward the house. My instincts were screaming now in a way I couldn't ignore anymore. Whatever was living in these forests was not behaving like animals. They were coordinating, working together. That thought made everything feel far more dangerous. Later that afternoon, I decided to drive into town. I needed to speak with anyone who might know more about what was happening. The small diner near the highway had always been a gathering place for locals, hunters, and forest workers who spent most of their lives in the woods. If anyone had seen something strange recently, it would be there, inside the diner. The smell of coffee and frying bacon filled the warm air. A few older men sat near the window, talking quietly while watching the snowy road outside. I recognized one of them immediately, an old forestry ranger named Walter Collins. Walter had worked the forests of northern Michigan for nearly 40 years. If anyone understood the woods around here, it was him. I walked over and sat down at the table. At first I hesitated, unsure how to even begin the conversation. But eventually I described what I had seen, the tracks, the eyes in the forest, the figure standing outside my cabin during the night. Walter didn't laugh. He didn't look surprised either. Instead, he slowly set down his coffee cup and stared at me for several seconds with an expression I couldn't quite read. Then he said something that made the air in the room suddenly feel colder. "You're not the first person this winter to see it." The other men at the table went completely silent. Walter leaned slightly closer before continuing, in a quieter voice, "People around here have been spotting something moving through the woods for months now. Hunters, loggers, even a couple state patrol officers driving the back roads at night." He paused for a moment, then added the one sentence I will never forget, and every single one of them described the same thing. Walter looked directly at me. "A dogman." The diner suddenly felt much smaller after Walter said that word. Dogman. No one laughed. No one rolled their eyes like people usually do when strange stories are mentioned. Instead, the other men at the table exchanged uneasy glances, like they had already heard this conversation before. One of them slowly stirred his coffee without speaking. Staring down at the cup, Walter leaned back slightly in his chair. "You said you saw it standing upright?" he asked calmly. I nodded. The old ranger sighed quietly and rubbed his beard. "That's what everyone says," he muttered. 7 to 8 feet tall. Moves like a man, but built like a wolf. One of the other men at the table finally spoke up. "You're talking about the thing near the logging roads?" he asked Walter. Walter gave a slow nod. "Not just the logging roads anymore." The words hung in the air like a storm cloud. Walter looked back at me. "About 2 months ago, a pair of state forestry officers reported something crossing a service road near the Huron National Forest. They thought it was a bear at first, but when their headlights hit it..." He paused. "They said it stood up." My chest tightened again. "What happened next?" I asked. Walter glanced at the other men before answering. "They said it turned and looked directly at them, just like you described, eyes reflecting amber in the headlights." He tapped the table with his finger slowly. "But that's not the strange part." I leaned forward. "The strange part," Walter continued, "is that it didn't run away." The other man at the table nodded grimly. "They said it walked into the forest," he added quietly, like it knew exactly where it was going. Felt the same chill from the night before, creeping down my spine, because that was exactly how the creature had behaved near my cabin. Walter continued speaking. There have been more reports lately. Hunters hearing howls they can't explain. Campers finding tracks around their tents in the morning. One truck driver even claimed something ran alongside his vehicle for almost 30 seconds before disappearing into the trees. He paused again, and every description matches the same thing. The diner had gone completely quiet now. Even the waitress at the counter had stopped moving. Walter leaned closer to me. Where exactly is your cabin located? He asked. I told him the area near the forest edge outside town. Walter's face darkened slightly. That's closer than the other. Sightings, he said. One of the men at the table shook his head slowly. That means it's moving, he murmured. Moving? The word echoed inside my head. Walter finished his coffee and placed the cup down gently. You need to be careful, he said. These forests are bigger than people realize. If something intelligent is living out there, it knows how to stay hidden. I asked him if he believed the Dogman was real. The old ranger didn't answer right away. Instead, he stared out the diner window toward the distant tree line stretching along the horizon. After several seconds, he finally spoke. I've spent 40 years walking through those woods, he said quietly, and I've learned something about predators. He turned back toward me. Real predators don't reveal themselves unless they want to. The statement sent another wave of unease through my chest. Walter stood up from the table and put on his coat as he walked toward the door. He stopped beside me one last time. There's one more thing, he said. Quietly, I looked up. Walter's expression had turned serious. Every sighting we've heard about lately happened during winter. He opened the door. Cold air rushed into the diner before stepping outside. Walter glanced back at me. And winter, he said, is when predators start hunting closer to human territory. Asterisk. Walter's words stayed with me long after I left the diner. The sky had begun turning gray as clouds rolled slowly across northern Michigan. Snow was starting to fall again, light at first, drifting through the air like silent ash. The forest roads outside town stretched empty and quiet, disappearing between endless rows of pine trees as I drove back toward my cabin. I couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed. Before, the encounter felt like a rare accident. Now it felt like the beginning of something else. The tires of my truck crunched softly across the frozen gravel as I turned onto the narrow road leading home. Snow had already begun covering the ground again, slowly erasing the tracks I had seen earlier that morning. The forest looked peaceful from a distance, but now I understood how deceptive that calm could be. Somewhere inside those woods, something was moving, something intelligent. When I reached the cabin, the clearing was silent again. Snowflakes drifted lazily through the air, settling over the roof and the frozen ground. At first, everything looked normal, but the moment I stepped out of the truck, I noticed something that made my stomach tighten instantly. The snow near the edge of the clearing had been disturbed again. Fresh tracks, but these were different. The footprints were deeper this time, spaced farther apart as if the creature had been moving faster. They circled the cabin once before disappearing back toward the tree line. My heart began beating faster as I followed the trail carefully. The Dogman had returned, but this time it hadn't stopped at the edge of the clearing. It had walked closer I followed the prints until they stopped just beneath the window where I had stood the night before. The snow there had been pressed down heavily, as if the creature had remained there for several seconds, maybe longer. I slowly turned around. Scanning the forest, the tree stood motionless, under the falling snow, but the feeling returned. Immediately, that same invisible pressure in the air, the sense that something nearby was watching. Again, then I heard it. A low sound coming from somewhere, deeper in the woods. Not a howl, more like a rumbling growl carried softly through the trees. The sound vibrated, faintly through the air, deep and controlled. It didn't sound aggressive. It sounded territorial, like a warning from something that understood exactly where its boundaries were. My breath caught in my chest, because the sound was closer than before, much closer. I stepped backward, slowly toward the cabin door, my eyes fixed on the forest. For several seconds, nothing moved. Snow continued falling quietly, covering the fresh tracks and swallowing the landscape in white silence. Then something shifted between the trees. A massive shape stepped forward slightly, just enough for the outline to become visible against the falling snow. The Dogman, even from a distance, I could see how enormous it was. Its shoulders were broad and powerful, its long arms hanging beside its body. The thick fur covering its body moved gently with the wind. The creature stood perfectly still, watching me again, those amber eyes locked onto mine. This time there was no fallen log hiding it, no darkness concealing its shape. It was standing openly at the edge of the forest, and it wasn't alone. Two more shapes appeared behind it, slightly smaller, but unmistakably similar. My pulse exploded with adrenaline. Three of them, the largest one, stepped forward half a pace, towering above the others like a leader. Its head tilted slightly as it studied me. Snow settled on its shoulders, melting slowly against the thick fur. For a long moment, we simply stared at each other across the clearing. Then the creature did something unexpected. It turned its head toward the two shapes behind it and released a low growl. The sound was short, controlled, almost like a command. The two smaller figures immediately stepped back into the darkness of the forest, obeying. The large Dogman remained there for another few seconds, watching, studying. Then it slowly turned and disappeared into the trees after them. The forest swallowed the shapes completely, and just like that, the clearing was silent again. But standing there in the falling snow, one terrifying realization settled into my mind. That creature hadn't been hunting me. It had been showing me something, showing me that these forests didn't belong to us, and that whatever lives out there is far more organized than anyone ever imagined. I didn't move for several seconds after the three figures vanished into the forest. Snow continued falling quietly across the clearing, slowly covering the tracks that had led to the edge of the trees. The silence that followed felt heavier than before, like the woods themselves were holding their breath. My mind was racing, trying to process what I had just witnessed. Three of them, not just a lone creature wandering through the forest like an animal. What I had seen looked coordinated, structured. The way the smaller ones stepped back after the low growl from the larger Dogman felt almost like obedience, like a pack following a leader. That realization unsettled me more than anything else. Predators that operate alone can be dangerous, but predators that operate in groups are something entirely different. Wolves hunt that way. They communicate, they plan, they control territory. And what I had just witnessed looked disturbingly similar. Except wolves don't stand upright. I backed as slowly toward the cabin and stepped inside, locking the door behind me. My hands were shaking now, not from cold, but from the overwhelming weight of what I had just seen. I moved toward the window again and looked out across the clearing. Nothing moved, but the forest looked different now. Every shadow between the trees felt deeper. Every dark space looked like it could be hiding something enormous just beyond sight. For the first time since moving here, the woods didn't feel like home. They felt like someone else's territory. That night, I stayed awake for hours, sitting at the kitchen table with the lights off. The only illumination came from the faint glow of the moon reflecting off the snow outside. I kept watching the tree line, expecting those amber eyes to appear again. But they didn't. Instead, sometime after midnight, a distant howl echoed through the forest. Then another answered it, and another. The sounds rolled across the hills like waves, deep and powerful, far larger than any wolf pack I had ever heard. The howls carried a strange rhythm to them, almost like communication passing between distant points in the forest. The sound lasted nearly a minute, then it stopped. The silence that followed felt even more unsettling. The next morning, I drove back into town again and told Walter what I had seen. When I described the 3 dogmen standing at the tree line, his expression changed in a way I hadn't seen before. Concern, real concern. Walter listened quietly until I finished speaking. Then he leaned forward slightly and lowered his voice. "Did the large one step forward first?" he asked. I nodded. Walter sighed. "That means you saw the dominant one." The words sent a chill through my spine. "What do you mean?" I asked. Walter rubbed his hands together slowly before answering. "In most predator groups, the leader shows itself first, not to attack." He paused, but to establish presence. The idea made my chest tighten again. Walter stood up and walked toward the window of the diner, staring out toward the distant forest stretching along the horizon. Snow was still falling lightly, covering the roads and rooftops of the quiet town. After a moment, he spoke again. "These woods are older than people think," he said quietly. "Long before towns were built here, long before highways cut through the forests, something else lived out there." He turned back toward me, and maybe it never left. I drove home slowly that afternoon, thinking about everything Walter had said. The forests of northern Michigan stretched endlessly round the road, silent and mysterious beneath the falling snow. Somewhere inside those woods, something powerful was moving, something intelligent, something that had clearly been watching people for a long time. And the more I thought about the way the dogman had stood there at the edge of the forest, calmly observing the cabin before leaving, the more one disturbing idea continued forming in my mind. Maybe the creature hadn't been threatening me at all. Maybe it had simply been letting me know something that the stories people whisper about the dogman in Michigan might not be legends anymore. Because if what I saw was real, then the dogman isn't hiding deep in the wilderness. It's already living closer to us than anyone wants to believe. After everything that happened, I still return to the same question over and over again. What exactly is living in the forests of Michigan? For most of my life, I believed these woods were completely understood. Wolves, bears, deer, coyotes, every predator, every animal had its place in the ecosystem. Hunters tracked them, Biologists studied them. Rangers monitored their populations. Nothing mysterious, nothing unknown. But the night I saw those amber eyes staring from the trees changed that belief forever. Because what I encountered didn't behave like an animal. Animals react to humans with instinct, fear, aggression, curiosity, but always instinct. What I saw in the forest behaved with something else. Entirely. Awareness, patience, control. The way the largest Dogman stood at the tree line, with the others behind it, still plays in my mind. The way the smaller ones stepped back when it growled, almost like soldiers following a command. That wasn't random behavior. That looked like hierarchy, like structure. And if creatures like that truly exist in these forests, then it means something far more unsettling than a simple monster hiding in the woods. It means we might be sharing these forests with something intelligent enough to remain hidden. Think about how large the forests of Michigan really are. Thousands of square miles of dense wilderness stretching across mountains, rivers, and deep valleys. There are places out there where a person could walk for days without seeing another human. Being places where something large could move unseen for years or decades. And if those creatures are as intelligent as the encounters suggest, then they wouldn't reveal themselves easily. They would avoid people, observe quietly, move mostly at night, exactly the way every witness describes. That might explain why sightings are so random, why they always happen in the same kinds of places: remote logging roads, isolated cabins, deep wilderness trails, places where humans briefly step into territory that may not belong to us. Since that winter, I've spent countless nights thinking about the moment those 3 dogmen stood at the edge of the forest watching my cabin. They could have approached closer. They could have attacked, but they didn't. Instead, the dominant one simply observed me before leading the others back into the woods, almost like it had made a decision. And that raises a chilling possibility. Maybe the Dogman isn't just some random predator wandering through the forest. Maybe it understands us. Maybe it studies us the same way we study animals in the wild. And if that's true, then every time someone walks through the forests of Michigan at night, there's a chance they are not alone. A chance that something older, stronger, and far more intelligent might be watching quietly from the darkness between the trees, waiting, observing, remaining hidden. Because if the stories told by hunters, campers, and drivers across Michigan are real, then the Dogman may not be a legend at all. It may simply be a neighbor we have never truly noticed. And the next time you find yourself driving down a quiet forest road late at night, and the woods suddenly fall silent around you, you might want to look carefully at the tree line, because something out there may already be looking back.